This week on BSD Now, we'll be talking to Amitai Schlair of the NetBSD Foundation about package source, NetBSD's future plans, and much more. After that, if you've ever wondered what all this SSH stuff is about, today's tutorial has got you covered. We're going to be showing you some of the basics of SSH, as well as how to combine it with tools such as tmux for persistent sessions. So as usual, we're going to have news, feedback, and everything else right here on BSD Now, the place to be, SD. BSD Now, Episode 12, Collecting SSHells, recorded November 20th, 2013. Hi, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And we've got a great show coming for you guys this week, but first, before we head into the tutorials, head into a cool interview we're going to do live this week, so looking forward to that. We have news and headlines from around the world of BSD. So what's the first thing we got in the headlines this week?
The first one is a new post in the series Faces of FreeBSD. And they're hoping to bring this back to being a weekly thing. So that could be interesting for us as well. And this week they're profiling Colin Percival, the former FreeBSD security officer.
Sure.
And violinist.
Okay. So I guess what's it about specifically?
It goes back to 1999 and explains how he got into FreeBSD. Originally, he got the height of luxury, a 2 megabit always-on cable modem connection. And he and his older brother wanted to share it between their computers, so they set up an OpenBSD NAT router. And a couple months later, the hard drive for that died. And when Colin tried to set it up, again, he was having trouble. So he tried FreeBSD instead, and the installer was much easier.
Wow, back in sysinstall days.
Yes, he says, yes, he actually started using FreeBSD because of sysinstall. That's something.
That's cool. What year was that you said?
This is 1999.
1999, yeah. Okay. Well, that's really cool. So I guess this is going to be a running series they're going to be doing more of on a weekly basis?
They're hoping to, anyway. They've done a bunch in the past. I think they've even done Dan Langille and a bunch of other people. But then he goes on to talk about his time at Oxford and doing distributed computing and using FreeBSD as the server for that. And then he talks about how at one point he became distracted with concerns about the security of his server and understanding his limitations as a sysadmin. And so that's when he invented FreeBSD Update, the binary update tool for FreeBSD. Yes. And he presented that at a conference, and a couple months later, they're like, here, have a commit bit.
They just throw it at him. Here, make this work. Put it in the base.
Yep. And then he went on to make PortSnap and to join the security team. And then when the then current security officer left to go work at, quote, a fruit company in Cupertino, he became the security officer.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, FreeBSD Update. I mean, for those who don't know, what back in the day, you just have to do build worlds and kernels and do it all by hand.
Or sysinstall had this crazy thing where you would just overwrite base with a new base, but it didn't clean up any cruft and stuff. It was not recommended even by the people that invented it.
Right? Yeah. Don't you hate it when somebody publishes a tool and says this should be used by nobody? Yeah.
And then
that should be an interesting series.
Now he doesn't get to contribute so much, but his day job is working at the company he runs called TarSnap, which actually uses the technology he invented for the binary update tools to do online backup.
Yep, and all very well encrypted, and he's very paranoid about that kind of stuff.
Yes, so using some crypto that he invented, if that gives you an idea. Of the level of goodness going on there. And with that, he donates all the revenue from his December operating month to the FreeBSD Foundation. And because of that, he's now a silver level sponsor of the FreeBSD Foundation.
Oh, that's really cool. So take a look at TarSnap, you guys, if you want to see what Colin's been up to. It's like a cool product.
Secure way to back up your stuff. And you encrypt it on your computer before it's sent. Colin never has the ability to even know what files you backed up, let alone what's in them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very cool.
Yep.
maybe keep that. I'm not sure where he keeps his servers. If,
he uses the
BSD
Amazon EC2 and S3,
Okay,
and
so
that's
Amazon.
why the thing he's been contributing to lately is making FreeBSD work better
Amazon.
on EC2.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of work he's been pushing about getting that to run in EC2 properly.
Yes,
So that's
and that's
cool.
because he runs all his infrastructure on it.
Mm-hmm.
So it lets you know
we'll
how
look
stable
forward-
it is.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll look forward to seeing some more posts for that, and we'll, of course, link to that in the show notes after the episode comes out. But next up, it looks like we got a lot of new BSD presentation videos that have been uploaded from a variety of conferences.
Yes.
In this case, it looks like we have EuroBSDCon 2013, the Dev Summit videos, which if you've never been to a BSD conference or a Dev Summit, I mean, a Dev Summit's really something special because it's all the guys who write this code sitting in a room and discussing, oh, how can we fix this? How can we change this? Where are we going?
Right, it's
setting out roadmaps.
a little more interactive than what you would get with the typical talk in the main conference is more of a lecture style. And maybe there's a couple of questions. Whereas in the Dev Summit, it's kind of people are like offering suggestions on way to solve a problem. Well, like it's an interactive discussion.
Yeah, it's a back and forth.
Yeah.
Here's a problem, here's the topic. Let's sit and discuss how we can come up to some resolution for this.
Exactly.
And hopefully by the end of it, they've come up with some at least direction to go on, and somebody commits a patch like an hour later, right?
Yeah, but even at EuroBSDCon, they were talking about, well, how are we going to solve the problem of signed packages and stuff? And then in the corner later, you see, Baptiste and Des and a bunch of other people huddled in a corner with their laptops, and all of a sudden there's patches.
Mm-hmm. It just works.
Yep.
So yeah, that's the Dev Summits again. Very special, and it's cool. They recorded all that. So if you're interested in kind of seeing how the inner workings of the projects happen, take a look at those. In addition to EuroBSDCon, there's some Asia BSDCon 2013 videos there as well.
Yes, Hiroki finally got those put together. That's from March, but they're very good talks. Some of them, some of them I don't think have been done anywhere else.
Given
but
elsewhere. And especially the Japanese speakers.
Yep.
I don't think most of those guys have gone to Euro aside from Hiroki and Dashi
Goto did his at BSDCan, I think. But other than that, it's mostly been...
mostly just at Asia BSDCon.
Yep.
So.
But
so definitely.
Henning's talk on TCP IP checksums was interesting. I think that one was at BSDCan as well, but I don't know. There was extra flavor to it in Japan. He was wearing the little white gloves because he noticed that in Asia, if you're doing anything official, you're wearing these white gloves. And so he decided he needed a pair of them to give his talk.
Which was very cool.
And it's that kind of stuff that, it's just extra flavor. And then we're still waiting, and we expect to have the EuroBSDCon main conference videos up not too long from now as well.
Do they give us an ETA on that?
No, but if they got the Dev Summit, at least they're moving in the right direction.
Okay, well, good. At least maybe half of them are done now, however much they had from the Dev Summit. But cool.
And also, if you look in the show notes, we have a link to Michael Lucas's talk, OpenBSD for Linux Users, which he gave at the Michigan Users Group last week.
What's he saying this? Among other things, I compare OpenBSD to Richard Stallman and physically assault an audience member. We also talk a long time, memory randomization, PF, BSD license versus GPL, Microsoft, and other OpenBSD stuff. So that just sounds like a cool talk to listen to. All kinds of, kind of hits all the nails.
And
there.
if you've never been physically assaulted by Michael Lucas, I highly recommend it.
Okay, too much information.
At Malta, he demonstrated how to kill people with a butter knife on me.
Oh, okay.
This is at the closing dinner on the Sunday night, I guess it was.
Well, he is from Detroit, and I suppose you do pick up a few skills,
well,
right?
and he's done some kind of, I forget which type of martial arts for like 10 years now. He's, he looks like a really nice guy, and he is, but he will take you out if he has to.
Yep. Well, it looks like it was a really informative presentation. There's a lot of stuff in there, answers to a lot of common questions at the end. So if you're a Linux guy or somebody who just wants to see Michael Lucas, curious about BSD, definitely click the link in the show notes after the show's done. So let's see, next up we have a call for presentations for FOSDEM 2014 and New York City BSDCon 2014. So what's up with those, Alan?
There's conferences, one in Europe and one in New York, obviously, and they're looking for the presentations, people to give talks.
So FOSDEM's in Brussels, Belgium, right?
Yes, it's in Brussels, Belgium, and that's February 1st and 2nd. And the New York City BSDCon, I think they're not quite sure about the date yet, but it'll be in early February of 2014.
Okay, so if you're planning on submitting a talk, you probably got to get those in
Yes.
pretty soon, I imagine, especially Actually, shoot, they're both around the same time.
Yes,
so,
actually,
yeah,
I think
papers in
yeah.
now.
And if you haven't submitted, if you want to go to Asia BSDCon, the deadline for papers for that is like Monday or something. You have to really hurry
Yeah,
up.
it was the end of November, so it's
It's the 24th or
rapidly-
27th, something like that. So at most you have, I think you only have till Sunday, or maybe till next Wednesday.
Well, let's see. I could tell you right here. Call for papers. We have deadline is the 22nd, so
Oh,
2 days.
2 days.
Or wait, no, excuse me. That's tutorials. If you want to do tutorial 22nd, the 29th for papers.
Okay.
So if you want to give a talk.
So yes, you have till next Friday to get your talk written and, the proposal written and sent in.
Sure.
And
Although if you want to do a tutorial, which I don't know if we really mentioned that, but during the Dev Summit, at a lot of these conferences, they also have tutorials, and those could be anywhere from 3 to 6 hours, depending on how long the tutorial is. And if you don't want to go to the Dev Summit, or you're not a committer and don't really have any interest being there, the tutorials are great. There's been a variety of ones given at all the BSD conferences in the past. Yeah, more in depth on PF, or Kirk McCusick's done stuff on the internals of FreeBSD. I mean, it's pretty cool.
yeah, normally the Dev Summits are invite only. So if you, the other option is go to the tutorials, and they're very good. Like Kirk's, I think he takes his, it's a little high level, but it's, each week of his like university course on the internals of developing an operating system is condensed into an hour, and you get just the high level of, and basically a short version of his entire course.
Which is still really
Yes.
cool. If you can make it out for one of those, definitely come a day or two early before the conference and hit up the tutorials if you can. A lot of good material there. Plus, it's more interactive. So again, you're not just listening to a lecture.
Yep.
When I did one a few years back at Asia BSD, I mean, we were able to break out and actually do stuff on the keyboard and actually show this is how we do this, and take questions, hack on stuff right there. So it's definitely cool.
Yeah, at BSDCan, Dan McGill did one on Bacula, and he actually set it up as a lab so that everybody would actually set up their own Bacula on the LAN, and it wasn't just here's how you do it. It was actually let's do it together.
Yeah, let's do it, and make your fingers type the bits so that when you go home, the muscle memory remembers, oh yeah,
Yes.
I did this before. This is how
Yep.
this works. So yeah, again, can't stress it highly enough. That's really cool. If you're interested or just want to learn,
Yep.
need some new system and skills, go to the tutorials at your nearest BSD conference.
Yep.
But okay, next up in the news, we have the FreeBSD Foundation's year-end fundraising campaign.
Yes.
So they do this every year towards the end of the year. And for those who don't know, the FreeBSD Foundation has been around a while now. They've been supporting the FreeBSD project and community for over 13 years. So they would be the 501c3.org to go along with the project, protect the trademark. But they also raise a lot of money, and they use it for a lot of different things. So before we get into what they've done in the past, today, where they're at, I guess they've raised about $500,000.
Yep.
And their goal, I believe, is $1 million this year,
Yes.
right?
Last year, I think the goal was 600,000, or no, I think it was last year was $500,000, and we got to like 700.
Sure,
So,
it went well beyond.
yeah. So the goal for this year was to raise $1 million, but also to spend $1 million. Especially during the economic downturn, they have been hedging their bets and not spending all the money to make sure the
They're
foundation.
building a little bit of a buffer.
Yeah. And so
Which,
this year they're trying to actually, make sure they can get as much stuff done as possible.
so that's a good thing to do. So some of the things the FreeBSD Foundation does is using those donations towards hiring developers to do new features. Sometimes there's things that really need to be done, but they're messy and yucky and no one wants to do them. So
Right.
you need to
Or-
hire somebody to sit down and do
Yeah,
it.
there's not a company like Netflix that needs that feature too, right? Like integrated Intel graphics. Everybody wants that for the laptop, but it's not something anybody wants to write.
Sure, or maintain
Yeah,
it or
exactly.
whatever. I think they did the UEFI boot project,
Yep.
which is still in progress. The AMD stuff initially. Oh gosh, there's been a slew of them. I remember an IPv6 only kernel was kind of
Yep.
cool. So
The,
yeah, there's been some neat projects they've done.
Or iSCSI in the kernel instead of using land. That's coming along very nicely.
Yeah, so that's the kind of stuff donations goes towards. In addition, they also are helping to pay for server infrastructure. Somebody's got to run those systems, and they support conferences, the community. They're able to sponsor developers and users to get out to conferences, which is
Yes,
pretty
that's
cool.
very important, especially, some of these developers are doing a lot of work. And, if they donate a lot of their time to the project, they probably can't afford to fly off to Malta to go to a conference.
Sure.
But the foundation helps with that.
He's able to help get them there,
Yeah.
and that's invaluable to that person and the community in general, getting to meet some of the people working on these cool
Well, yeah, if
features.
somebody's building a feature you want to use, it's great to be able to talk to them and let them know, what your pain point is, so that they can try to solve that for you.
Yep. They also go around and promote FreeBSD at events and conferences. So when you go to various shows, you may see a FreeBSD Foundation booth there.
Yep.
And sometimes I'll be sitting at that, depending on which show it's at. But yeah, it's pretty cool. They definitely are doing some good work out in the community. Another big thing they got coming this year, though, is they're preparing to debut the new online magazine, the FreeBSD Journal. Which I guess, is that a digital only magazine?
It's going to be like PDF and iPhone and stuff only at first.
Okay.
I think there might be a plan to try to do print, but I don't know if that'll probably depend on if people want a print version of it.
Sure, just seeing what the demand is. But they're trying to basically kickstart that, I guess, and get that rolling. So that'll be something cool here in the future. So typically, I think you said we're at 500,000 or whatever, and they're going towards 1 million. But typically, that's not something to be worried about, because a lot of companies make their huge donations in December.
Right.
What will happen is it's the year, the end, end of the year. You got to get in before tax time and all that. So we're hoping to see them bump up over 1 million, but it's not just the big companies that need to do it. I mean, every small donation counts, because more important than just a couple big donations is the number of people donating. Like, we got to be able to show companies who want to work with FreeBSD that, we've had, this many people donate to the project, big and small. So there's definitely interest in it. And it's not just one or two parties trying to push this. But if that's something you're interested in, definitely go over to their website and make a donation today.
Because also for the IRS, for keeping the status as a nonprofit rather than just a trade group, if all the money comes from, 10 companies, then that's just a trade group. But if we can show that there's, 2,000 end user donors, even if they're just donating $5, it shows that, there's actually a community here, not just these 10 big companies.
Yeah, not just a few big guys, using it for their own nefarious purposes. There's a vibrant user community, which is good.
So it's important to get those small donations to keep the nonprofit status. And I think last year around this time, they were at less than half of their goal. And they exceeded the goal by a large margin. So hopefully we can do that again this year.
Let's see where they're at. Yeah, I'm looking. It says they're about 436,000 right now, and they're reaching for 1 million. So they've already had almost 1,000 donors as of now. So again, if you're a FreeBSD user, maybe check that out. FreeBSDFoundation.org is where you can do all that. Okay, and that's actually the wrap up for the weekly news items. Next up, we're going to be having a live interview with a NetBSD developer.
This week, we're joined by Amitai Schlair from the NetBSD Foundation. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, good to have you here with us. So we got a whole list of questions, but of course, before we really get into anything, we always start off with go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, how you got involved with BSD in general, what your first experience was with BSD, that kind of thing.
Well, like Colin Percival, I'm a musician. My undergraduate degree from Columbia University here in New York City is in music, but obviously that's not how I got into NetBSD. I got into NetBSD because when I was in high school, the best programming environment that was available to me at the time was a Texas Instruments graphing calculator, which doesn't run NetBSD. That's not the end of the story. It's the beginning of the story. It was a TI-92, and it had a 68,000 CPU, Motorola CPU, that was 10 megahertz. It was faster than the computer we had in our house, which was a Mac Plus, a 68,000 at 8 megahertz. So the calculator was faster. And so I got into TI programming. It's the best environment that I had. And a small community sprung up around it with, links to other sites, and people would make programs and post them online, and TI provided a cable that you could sync to your computer from your calculator and vice versa. And so I got involved in that community, and we founded something called ticalc.org, which was a Linux machine in 1990, whatever that was. And I didn't know the first thing about it. I'd only ever used a Mac. So I said, I don't even know how to be useful to you guys. Let's say I get, a Mac 2CI or something that I could get cheaply. How could I learn anything about Unix so that I can eventually be useful? And one of the people on ticalc.org said, if that's the computer you're going to have, then you should run NetBSD. And that's how I got started.
So what is your role with the NetBSD project now?
So I have a couple. One, like you introduced me, I'm on the board of the NetBSD Foundation. And that, like the FreeBSD Foundation, the job is to be a nonprofit foundation registered with whatever tax code there is, accept donations, maybe set priorities for the project, oversee work such as there is, and that's one role. Another role that I've had for a longer time, I just joined the board this past year. A role I've had for a longer time is on the project management committee for Package Source, which is the packaging system that NetBSD began and is now almost, but not quite, its own separate project.
Hey, do you wear any other hats?
Not officially, but I am a member of the admins team just because I have a pair of hands and I'm in New York City and we have some machines here. And I am a member of the web team because I have an ongoing project to replace how we do our website using IkiWiki.
So you mentioned a little bit about it, but I assume the NetBSD Foundation is similar, say, to the FreeBSD Foundation. Are you guys, do you do anything differently to them as far as you know, or is it mostly taking donations and doing projects?
I would imagine it's very similar. I don't know the FreeBSD operations very well, but I would assume the function is largely the same.
Okay. So what's your specific roles on the board? Do you guys have meetings you have to attend, and do you get together in person from time to time, or just chat on the net about different things?
We do have meetings from time to time. In fact, I'll have one right after this call.
Oh, okay.
Every week on Wednesdays, and we get together on ICB actually, but same idea. And we have an agenda, and we go through what's going on, and we react to whatever we have to react to, and then we try to be proactive where we can.
Oh, very cool.
Since you're very involved with Package Source, could you give us a brief overview of what Package Source is and how it compares to something like ports?
Sure. So Package Source derives originally, if you go back in history, I believe it was forked from FreeBSD ports. And so the idea, if you're familiar with ports, is the same. It's a tree with a skeleton of make files and patches and checksums. And it contains build instructions of how to fetch a dist file and patch it and build it and dependencies, all that kind of stuff. And you use make to do it. So it's the same idea. Where Package Source starts to diverge from FreeBSD ports, OpenBSD ports, is a deliberate focus on portability, which in the context of its NetBSD origins makes a lot of sense. In the context of Package Source, what portability means is in part being able to build for different hardware architectures, but that just kind of comes with the territory. What it means that's special to Package Source is being able to work on different Unix-like operating systems. From Solaris, which was one of the first platforms it was ported to Mac OS X, which I was involved in the porting in the early 2000s, to Linux and what have you. Even Windows with a compatibility layer can run Package Source. So if you're an sysadmin and you have either a heterogeneous set of systems or the potential to be stuck with a heterogeneous set of systems, Package Source is unique for you because it lets you do the same thing on all of them.
That's pretty slick. So what's coming up for the next big release of NetBSD? Any new features or anything you want to talk about there?
There's a few. It's a bit early yet. We don't have as regular a release cycle as some other BSDs do. A couple of things that are in flight that will probably or may make it. One of them is a new version of GCC. We're expecting that 4.8 will be in before we cut the branch. Guessing the branch will be cut sometime around the new year. We're hoping for DRM to make it in. I haven't been following that terribly closely. It may not make it. And then once the branch is cut in around the new year, we probably have about a half year to do release engineering until we think it's ready to go.
So in what ways do you personally use NetBSD?
Wow. Well, first of all, if we go back far enough, it was the system that I learned Unix on. And I think, obviously, for that purpose, it's really well suited. It comes with almost nothing. It's configured very minimally. It's kind of internally self-consistent in the way that the BSDs are. And it runs on whatever you got. And when I was in high school, that was important to me, and it's still important to me now. So that's how I learned it, and that's how I got to Package Source. What I currently do with it is fairly limited because I don't have a lot of time for systems in general that aren't work-related at this point. But I have a virtual machine from Panix, which is an ISP here in New York, that is NetBSD, and that's where I have my web and mail server. And I use it for development purposes. Occasionally I'll spin up a virtual machine and test things out there. In the future, when I have more time, I have lots more things I'd like to be doing with it. And under the current constraints, that's what I'm doing. For package stores, maybe this is an interesting question that you'll be willing to have asked once I answer it. I use it at work, in addition to on that server that I'm talking about, because at work I'm on a Linux machine that I don't have root access to. And package source is fine with that. It's fine with everything, so it's fine with that. And that lets me get particular versions of tools and software on my work machine that I've come to rely on over my career to help make me productive. And it's easy to get them there and keep them up to date and see when they have security problems, because package source is willing to work in that environment much the same as it does in any other one. So that's very valuable to me.
Oh, that's a pretty neat feature to have.
So you said you do development. So does your desktop run NetBSD?
No, like a lot of NetBSD people, my desktops are OS X. And I've recently begun thinking about what it would take for me to have a NetBSD desktop, and it's being thought about. But for now, it's practical to have an OS X. I'm on a laptop a lot, and power management is important to me.
Sure. So if any of our listeners are interested in this and maybe want to get involved with NetBSD and pkgsrc, where would you recommend to go to get involved and help out?
Well, for starters, there's www.netbsd.org, which is how to learn more about the operating system. There's www.packagesource.org, which is for the package system. And there are mailing lists you can join. There's a bug tracker that you can browse through and see what's inspiring, or maybe have your interest piqued, and find something that bothers you and work on it, and people will be happy to help you.
Does your toaster run NetBSD?
I don't have a toaster because I'm opposed to carbohydrates, but if I did, it might.
Okay. So how else can people find you online?
Well, I'm available at www.schmons.com. You can find me on Twitter at schmons. And in addition to a musician and a member of the NetBSD Foundation, I'm also president of the Philalexian Foundation, which is a nonprofit that supports the Literary Society that I belong to at Columbia. A very worthy cause, one of the oldest organizations at a university in this country's history. And a software developer, product manager, and an Agile practitioner and coach.
Cool.
So you can find me doing all those things online.
So, is there anything else you'd want to talk about?
Just double checking my list. No, I think that basically covers it.
Okay.
I would recommend that people who are interested in solving a problem once and having it stay solved, and then being able to use that solution wherever they go, whether it's different hardware or different operating systems, I would urge them to consider NetBSD and package source, because that's the problem space that it fits really well.
Okay, so today's tutorial, we're going to be covering two topics in one. We're going to be first looking at SSH and how we can combine that with tmux, how they can go hand in hand in our daily lives, and so we're going to combine them all into one tutorial. SSH, specifically OpenSSH, of course, is used by millions of people every day, and odds are, if you're listening to this, you've probably used it. It's been ported to many operating systems and has become the de facto standard for any remote admin of Unix or Unix-like systems. Its roots come from the OpenBSD project, but they also developed a portable version of it for other OSs. So, of course, FreeBSD has it, NetBSD, Dragonfly, and pretty much everything has some form of SSH in it nowadays. But they all provide their own specific SSH documentation, so whatever platform you're going to use it on, you'll want to become familiar with a number of commands and utilities, some of which are going to include the SSH command, which is the client, SSHD, which will be your daemon and server component, STP is a way to copy files, and then SFTP is a FTP client service alternative, and of course the SSH-keygen, where we can create our public and private key pair generators. There's also going to be a few other things in the manual, but these are going to be the ones we're going to focus on today. So, of course, you can hit up the tutorial notes afterwards and look at the links for those or look at the manual page. But in this tutorial, we're going to start with the basic usage and configuration of an SSH daemon and client. But if you'd really like to learn OpenSSH inside and out, we recommend reading SSH Mastery by Michael W. Lucas, who was on with us a few weeks back. Mm-hmm. It's a really good book. Could teach you all the great tricks you'd probably never think of trying. It's also possible to create a VPN with SSH, which we did on a previous tutorial, so you can go back and reference that if you want to learn how you can tunnel all your traffic through SSH. And of course, there's graphical applications that can be run through it and much, much more. But I guess we'll go ahead and get started with daemon configuration, Alan. So why don't you go ahead and take it away here.
Yep. So in the tutorial, there's a big chunk of SSHD config you can apply, but I've already done that here, so just to save time. So I have two machines set up here. A, it will be the server, and B will be the client. So on the server, I will start up SSHD, and then I'll go over to the client. And now if I do SSH username at the first machine, it'll if it's the very first time you connect, you'll be prompted with the fingerprint of the server. So SSH provides a level of authentication along with your login. The general idea is it works kind of like SSL. You're making sure that you're connecting to the machine you think you're connecting to. So the very first time, it's kind of your responsibility to verify that the key print is correct. If you're using newer versions of OpenSSH, I think 6.3 and up, it will automatically look in DNS for SSHFP records, which are basically publishing what is supposed to be the correct fingerprint in DNS. If that's signed with DNSSEC, the SSH client will trust it automatically. So anyway, if it's the first time, you'll have to make sure you're connecting to the right place and then say yes. And now it's prompting for the password, so I'll put in the password. And now we can see, even though I'm actually on machine B, I'm now logged into machine A. And so that's how you can SSH on another machine and do stuff. Another thing you can do is copy a file. So I can say, make a new file called my file, and I can SCP that. So SCP works the same as a regular CP command for copying, except for the file on either the source or destination side is prefixed by username at server name : and then the path. So in this case, we'll say copy BSD now, or copy my file to the other machine, and on that side, we'll call it, their file. Right, and now if we switch back to machine A, we can see that that file now exists on the other machine. And you can also do interactive, right? If we go SFTP and then the username at server, you get an FTP style interface, so you can do get and put and all that regular stuff you would do. And it's useful if you don't know the exact path to the file on the other side. Sometimes, and also the handy thing is things like tab complete work. So for figuring out what that path is, or not just avoiding having to type it all, it can be useful for that. So all that is well and good, but if you want to do some kind of automated stuff, like make a script that copies a file over to another machine once an hour, the fact that it stops and prompts for a password is kind of an issue. So kind of like SSL, SSH supports this idea of public-private key pairs, where you can make a public and private key, kind of like a GPG key or an SSL certificate. And as long as you have the private key, if you set the public key to be trusted, then you can log in using the certificate as your authentication instead of a password. Now, normally, when you have a certificate like that, you would encrypt it with a password. And so in that case, you would be entering the password locally instead of doing it. Instead of the remote machine asking for a password, it's asking for the key. But on your local machine, that key is encrypted so that somebody else who has access to your machine can't use it. But in the case of a script, you would not encrypt the key. So in order to do that, we have to make a key. So here, let's do that now. So we can use the ssh-keygen command and say, I would like to generate an RSA key that's 4096 bits. And it asks what you'd like to call the key, what you'd like the password on the key, and then it draws a little random art image that kind of gives you an idea of what the key looks like. So now that we've done that, we can see that there's now a directory in our home directory called .ssh, and in it we have the private and public key pair. You can see the private key has much tighter permissions, only you are allowed to read it and write it, whereas the public key, anyone's allowed to read it. So now what we can do is we can copy that over to the other machine. So what we'll do is copy recursively. So -R means copy a whole directory instead of just the one file. And the P means keep the permissions, because that'll be important, because SSH will stop working on purpose if your key is accessible by other people. Because that's not supposed to happen. So it'll print a giant scary warning and not do anything.
Yeah, I think I did that once or twice.
Yep.
And it is a big scary warning.
So we're going to copy the entire .ssh directory to the remote machine. There's that fingerprint warning I was talking about. I'm logged in as a different user, so there's a different cache of what keys I've accepted before. And so now that's all copied over. So now if I go over to the first machine, the server, I now have the public and private key. So now what we need to do is trust that public key. So there's a file called authorized keys. Currently it doesn't exist, but we'll create it in a second. And every public key that's listed in there is allowed to log in as this user without a password. So if we look at the public key, it's basically one really long line. It says this is an SSH RSA key, the fingerprint of the key, which is base 64 encoded, and then the username. It shows that this key was actually generated by the user BSD Now on the machine BSD Now B. So if we just append that to our authorized keys file, now if we go back to machine B, if I try to SSH to BSD Now at the first machine, it didn't prompt me for a password, it just logged me in instantaneously.
So this is something really useful if you're somebody going to be scripting stuff out, like rsync backups, for example, and you really don't want a password on that.
Yeah, because now this works with anything that uses SSH, right? So if I make a new file, I can SCP new file to BSD Now at the other machine, and it copies it just like that. Now you have to remember, anybody who can read that file in that directory can now SSH it to that other machine. So if I'm just a user, root on this machine is allowed to go into, can override permissions and go into that directory and read my SSH key. So that means that the root on the machine would be able to SSH into my other machine. So you have to be very careful with these keys and deciding where to put them and so on. And that's why normally you would encrypt those keys so they can't be used without a password. But in the case of a cron script or something, you obviously don't have that option. So now the other useful thing is if we add to this tmux, which lets us have more consoles. So I've already installed it, so if I just fire up tmux, or if I spell it right, sorry, wrong machine.
Mm-hmm.
If I just fire up tmux, now I have this little console thing going. And I can do stuff. And then if I get disconnected, I can always reattach, right? So I'm on machine A. If I just SSH into the other machine, all right, so I'm on machine A, but I've, whoops, I just SSH'd into myself.
Whoops.
All right, so I'm on machine A, but I've SSH'd into machine B. Now, if something bad happens and my entire session goes away, let me just simulate that. Is that one? Yes. So if I just murderize the connection, okay, so now I've lost my connection. If I reconnect, so I'm back. I've logged back into machine A after my wireless cut out, or I shut down my laptop or whatever. And if I just do tmux attach, I'm now back to my old session, and whatever I was in the middle of is still running.
Which is very helpful. That's how I do builds like Podre or something. I know it's going to take a day, so I can fire it up in a session, disconnect, come back later on another computer and check on it.
The number of times where I've decided I needed to do that about 20 minutes after I start something. It's like, oh, okay, I'm going to replicate 10 terabytes over the LAN on between two servers that are off in some other country. And then I start it, and then I realize after it's been going for a little while, if I get disconnected right now, it's going to cancel that. I really wish I had started that in tmux or screen or something.
Yeah.
Yes, I was actually nagging some people at VBSDCon about porting a feature over from Solaris or Illumos, where you can detach something after you've already started it, in case you forget to put it in a screen before you start, or a tmux.
That's cool.
But yes, so that's how tmux can save you and all the work you were doing. It's also very useful if you just have something that runs at the console and gives you information all the time, or if you're playing with Beehive. Currently, Beehive only has this serial console, and so being able to detach from it and attach to it again later is very useful. Because with Beehive, if you know how to put it in the background, you have no way to reattach to it, and so you can't get at the console again. You can only SSH in or whatever. So yeah, tmux is very useful.
Well, cool.
And there's even more information about it in the tutorial. So go to our website, bsdnow.tv/tutorials, and you'll find this one, and it'll have even more detail than we can cover in a live show.
Okay. Well, thanks, Alan. We'll be back up here in a second with our weekly news roundup. Okay, next up we have our weekly news roundup, where we'll quickly go through some interesting news tidbits from the last week in the wider BSD ecosystem. So first up, if you're any kind of modern person, you haven't been living under a rock the last week, you probably know that the PlayStation 4 was released. So reason why we bring that up, though, is because the OS is heavily based on FreeBSD and uses the kernel, among other things. So we're going to have a link in the show notes. Actually, you can look on the Sony site and see which bits of open source software they're using in the system. They got them all listed out here.
Yep.
And look, what do you know? It says FreeBSD kernel, FreeBSD's fsic, and new fs commands. So,
USB stack, whole bunch of other stuff.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff, plus some other various open source packages as well. So that's kind of cool. It's neat to see that major game consoles running a version of FreeBSD, so it's always cool to see that it's being so widespread used.
Yeah, well, there was quite a bit of talk about it when there was rumors and stuff, but there was no really concrete proof. And now, a page on Sony's site where it's like, here's all the copyright notices we're required to publish, that seals it.
Yeah, there you go. Proof positive. Yep. So we'd really love at some point to get somebody on there, get somebody on the show actually to talk to us about that from Sony, what they did to FreeBSD, how they use it. But
yes,
we'll work on that, see if we can find someone.
Yes, and I think they're hoping to have some people from Sony come out to Asia BSDCon, and if that happens, then hopefully we can. We're
definitely going to corner.
Yes, yes, we're like, yes, you must do this.
Yep. So cool. So that's, of course, a big piece of news from last week. Next up, BSD Magazine has issued a new November issue. So this is different from BSD Journal we mentioned earlier, which is being started by in part by the FreeBSD Foundation. Yeah. But this is another free monthly BSD magazine, which is digital, and of course it's freely downloadable. Mm-hmm. And I guess this month's topics, they have configuring a high availability service on FreeBSD, IT inventory and asset management automation, more of a FreeBSD programming primer, some pfSense and Snort articles, as well as a few others.
Cool.
So as usual in the show notes, we'll have that linked for you guys if you want to grab that and read that. So we got next, Alan.
Next, pbulk makes it easier to build package source stuff. So it's a new tool for package source. I guess we should have bugged our guest about that a little bit more. But it's a new way to do bulk builds, and just yet another tool, I suppose.
Okay. Well, very cool. Then, of course, last week we had another PCBSD Weekly Digest go out. And one of the things it mentioned was we have a large number of PBIs, over 200 now, that have hit the 10 stable app cafe. Nice. So we're getting things prepared for 10. Release. A whole bunch of new bug fixes. Let's see, there were some fixes to network detection in the package and update managers, graphics support for NVIDIA, and some security updates for the login manager. In addition, this week, though, we're working on merging in some of the later Linux packages so that we can run Skype 4. And in addition to that, we're looking at maybe GNOME 3, Mate, and Cinnamon being in 10. So we're working hard to get that all imported. We'll probably have some more details on that for you at the end of the week.
No, and it says you mentioned that Flash is working properly in Chromium, and you were using YouTube, Vimeo, Hulu, and Amazon Video.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually kind of cool to go to Amazon Instant Video and pull up something from your archive or your library and watch it on PCBSD. It works out of box. If only Netflix would do something.
Well, they're working on it, right? But they're supposed to have the HTML5 and so on and so on.
At some point that'll happen. Yep. But so we're getting there. But that's the end of the weekly news roundup. Next up, we have your feedback and questions. So next up, we have questions from you, the audience. And this week, first, we have a question from Peter asking about S-Tunnel. So he says, hello, in the case of using S-Tunnel in a situation where Relay D is intercepting SSL traffic and substituting its own lookalike cert, if S-Tunnel is not configured to trust the signer used by Relay D, what happens? Does the S-Tunnel connection to the external destination S-Tunnel still proceed successfully, or does it fail, thus not allowing apps to run in an S-Tunnel?
That depends on your configuration. You have to give S-Tunnel a certificate bundle to compare against. And then there's a flag to set whether or not you want it to trust just anything or not. Because basically SSL has two different parts, right? The one part is providing encryption from end to end, and then the second part is making sure that the other end is actually who you think it is. Because it's not much use encrypting data between you and your friend if you're actually encrypting the data between you and the bad guy. And so, most people are using SSL only for the one part, so it can depend on how you set it up. But basically, that's a configuration thing. If you want it to work using untrusted certificates, then you could make it, and if not, then you can make it use a certificate bundle. There's one in the ports tree called NSS underscore.
Is that the CA certs one?
Yeah, the CA certs one. It's called CA-certs something. It's in the security section of the ports tree, and that's the certificate bundle from Mozilla. So you would have to configure S-Tunnel to use that to make it actually check certificates.
Yep.
So next question is from Kel Alexander, and he's writing in regards to the PF tutorial. So he asks, is the PF on FreeBSD older or newer than OpenBSD? The one on FreeBSD is actually older.
How many versions are we behind?
I don't know that PF, because PF is just part of OpenBSD, I don't know that they actually have versions of PF specifically. So it's the PF that was in some version of OpenBSD. And then in FreeBSD, there were some improvements made to it for SMP. Those similar improvements have since happened in the one that's in OpenBSD. But FreeBSD at the time chose not to update when OpenBSD changed the syntax of the rules because they didn't want to break existing firewall rules. But hopefully going forward, there's an effort underway to port the newer PF over to FreeBSD. And there we heard a bit about that at the VBSD Con. I think it was actually Baptiste, the guy who's can't possibly imagine.
Busy enough.
Yeah, I can't possibly imagine how he's going to find time to do it. But I've actually seen some commits in the repo already towards the goal of porting the newer PF back to FreeBSD because some of the new stuff is really interesting, like the more integration with RelayD and just everything, and having the newer rule syntax is actually going to be nice to have. He also wondered why we use the cctl. You can set gateway_enable equals yes in your rc.conf, and that sets the sysctl when you boot. I just set the sysctl manually to avoid having to boot to make it set it. But either way works. They do the same thing. As with everything in Unix, there's more than one way to skin a cat.
Yeah. Yep.
And as I like to say with Unix, it doesn't stop you doing the wrong thing, because that could also stop you from doing something clever. And he would also like to see a DNS tutorial.
Okay.
Because he's looking at doing... so he has a web server on his LAN, and when he goes... The dynamic DNS for it points to his public IP address so that everybody on the internet can reach that web server. So when he's on his LAN, it's going out to that IP address and either not getting there or going out and coming back. There's a setting in pfSense to do that. So there's a way to do it. I just don't know what the rule is off the top of my head. But there's a rule you can write that will make PF do the right thing there. Or you can do split horizon DNS, where you say, if the DNS lookup is happening inside the LAN, return this IP address, and if it's happening on the internet, return this IP address.
Okay. He also has a question, I guess, about encrypted remote backups.
Oh, yes. So he uses FreeBSD with ZFS on his file server at home and pulls backups from the desktop using rsync. Since he says that won't help if his house burns down or something, he wants to duplicate his backups to a friend's NAS, which is apparently running some Netgear stuff. Most of his important data is pictures of his kids and stuff, but he has some private files, and he'd want to keep those encrypted.
Wants to keep those unencrypted
on his server,
and desktop.
but encrypted when they go to someone else. So it depends how you decide to do that.
I guess I don't know if you're doing this on FreeBSD. I mean, you could use PEFs to mount that directory and have an encrypted form somewhere, and then an unencrypted. Like for your local LAN, you could have the unencrypted side be mounted somewhere where your local desktop and server can have access to it, and then have the encrypted side exported also on the server, and then only rsync the encrypted side.
Right. If the remote NAS was FreeNAS, you could just do the replication, and then with PEFs, it would mean the data that's in ZFS is encrypted, and so the replication would have it encrypted.
This would work even for rsync, though. It doesn't matter if he's backing up to a Linux box or anything. I mean, if he backs up the encrypted PEFs directory, he's only going to be encrypted all the encrypted file names.
With PEFs, when it's not mounted, it's all the files have like random names are actually encrypted, aren't they?
Correct. Well, but PEFs supports two directories, so you can create your encrypted directory where all the files are, and then when you mount PEFs, you can mount it to the second directory, and that's your clear directory.
Right. Okay.
So that would be the clear directory, would be the one you'd use for your server and desktop to actually access and grab your files. But then the encrypted side, you would just back up that directory via rsync to your remote NAS, and then everything's encrypted on a file-by-file basis. Right. And of course, if he doesn't have the key, it ain't no good to him.
Right. So that sounds like the best way to do it, I would say, right?
Yeah, that's the easiest way I can think of off the top of my head. So PEFS is PEFS, and it's if you're on a PCBSD box, it's in our package tree or package repo. It's in the ports tree as well. Yep. You can grab it out of there. Actually, I think on ours, we include it in the base system now for 9.2 and 10, so you don't even have to grab the package. But definitely a cool utility. There's a kernel module you'll have to load, but once you do that, you'll be good to go. Yep. Just read the man page. It's actually not as complicated as it looks at first.
Yeah, so it sounds like he just needs to install that port on his FreeBSD server at home, and then he can rsync the encrypted version of the directory off to his friend's dumb NAS, and it'll just work.
Okay, well, hopefully we answer your question.
Make sure you have to back up the keys, and you're not going to want to do that to your friend's NAS. So that's you probably save a copy of them to a USB stick or more than one.
Burn them to a DVD and put them in your fire box or safety deposit box somewhere or something.
Or something like that.
Cool. Okay, well, next up we have a question from Jordan. He's a longtime listener of TechSnap, and he's a proud owner of the awesome t-shirt, of course. But he's always used Linux until this last week. He loves the new show, by the way, even though 90% of it soars above his head. Is Linux really that easy, or is it just that different? Well, a little bit. I don't know. It's different.
Yes, it's different.
Not that it's easier.
Definitely not easier.
But honestly, most of the packages are the same, so you don't see a huge difference. So last Friday, he decided to download FreeBSD and load it into VirtualBox at work. He fumbled through the docs and managed to get KDE installed with a few of his other favorites, including Apache. It's been less than a week, and though I don't know much, he's gotten the whole system pretty much where he wants it. And right now, he's watching phpMyAdmin compile. So it sounds like he's building from the port tree.
Yeah, phpMyAdmin's PHP, so it doesn't actually compile. He's probably some dependencies have to pull in.
It just packages it up.
Yep.
But it looks like their job, they're going to soon be reworking their server config and trying to use less Windows and use more Linux BSD if they can. And the next thing he's going to tackle is figuring out how to use ZFS. They only have a few servers, nothing like our Fortress or Servitude. But he asks us, is there anything that would have helped you so much in the beginning, less than 10 servers, that you didn't know then but know now? Any advice on BSD server management is helpful. Thanks again, Alan and Chris. Show was great. It's awesome to finally hear what's going on in the world of BSD.
Yeah. I guess if you're doing it manually, the fact that almost every config file in FreeBSD, there's two versions of it. There's like rc.conf and rc.conf.local. And so when I did my first 5 servers, the rc.conf would be identical on all 5 servers, but the rc.conf.local would have things like the host name, the IP address, or anything that was specific to one machine. And then I would just copy the rc.conf to all the servers. I've since expanded that by using Puppet and managing the file across 90 machines, but you can just do it by hand when there's only 5 or 10.
I guess one thing I'd mention for me, I know when we started switching over to ZFS and setting up systems here, I just did it on a lot of single drive systems, which, it works, but ZFS does mirrored drives for no additional cost. Yep. So if you have a server, throw a second disk in it and just set it up as a mirror when you do the installation. Yep. And you'll thank yourself later when that first drive dies and it just keeps on going. You just replace it and never have to mess with it again. So
the other nice thing with ZFS is that you can do the mirror after the fact. So if you have a system that has just one drive and you decide, I'm afraid this is going to die, and this machine, all of a sudden this machine's important. It wasn't originally, but now it is. If you use the ZFS or the zpool attach command, you can add a second drive to the existing VDEV, and it'll upgrade it from a regular stripe to a mirror. And then it'll resilver, and you'll have a mirror, even though you didn't set it up as a mirror in the first place. Correct. Which is something you can't really do with most RAID type setups.
Yep. So again, the caveat with that would be don't wait until your existing drive is starting to act funny, because you're going to have to resilver the entire disk. And if you're already having problems, it may be too late at that point. But that was something I wish I did on a couple of my servers early on, was just put the second disk in right at installation so that when it did fail, I was already ready to roll. I didn't have to go rush out and find another 3 terabyte disk somewhere and make it work. But I guess that's hopefully we answered your question there and some tips on getting started. But ZFS will change your life. Yes. So if you can plan ahead a little bit, especially if you know what data sets you're going to use and which directories will have what files, make sure you turn on compression before you start putting stuff in there. You could turn it on after the fact, but I don't believe it.
When you do it after the fact, it only does things you write from that point on.
So.
If you're in a pinch for that, for example, I have some machines that upgraded from FreeBSD 9.1, which didn't support LZ2 or LZ4. So if you use ZFS send, you can pipe it to ZFS receive on the same computer. So do the replication, but not over the network, just back to the same computer. You have to have a new name for the data set, and then you can delete the old one and rename it into place after or whatever. But what it allows you to do is if you send and then receive it, and on the receiving side, you say set the option compression equals LZ4, it will recompress everything during that transfer. So you can manage to work around it, but although if you have a lot of data and you can only send a snapshot, so you at some point you have to stop using the files to sync it. But if you have a large data set that's actively being used, snapshot it, send all the big data, then you can do a second snapshot and send the hours of changes it took in the meantime, and then just repeat that process until the delta is really small, and you can take pause everything for 10 minutes to actually finish it up and reboot and or reset it up and rename everything, and then you have your everything on LZ4 or any other setting like that you want to change. If you decide to change the record size, if you set up your SQL database and you forgot to change the record size and you already have data there, you can rewrite it with the smaller record size or whatever other things you might have to do it like that. But yeah, for beginning stuff, the fact if you're starting out using BSD, then you're doing the right thing. You don't have a bunch of stuff to unlearn.
Yep, true. I think I'll take the next question here from Christian, since it's some stuff specific for us. Great show, guys. Congratulations on getting up the charts in iTunes, which is very cool, by the way. If you haven't looked and have some kind of iDevice, take a look at the tech section. So BSD Now is now his numero uno source for all BSD-related stuff. Very cool. So he has a couple questions. I guess you saw that FreeBSD is launching a binary package repository, and you asked if PCBSD is going to switch to the FreeBSD one or maintain our own repository, or is it going to sync with the FreeBSD repo? So the plan going forward is to still run our own. We roll repos for the specific releases of FreeBSD or PCBSD we're rolling. So 9.2, 10 stable, and eventually 10 release. In addition, we have our own ports and packages that we throw in there on top of the FreeBSD ports tree. Things like meta packages, which really wouldn't make sense to have in the FreeBSD tree. And in addition, we're trying to be a little more aggressive, pushing things in like Skype 4 and all the Linux compat stuff that goes with it, or the new GNOME 3, Mate, Cinnamon. I'm trying to get that in this week, actually. So we need a place where we can play with those things and push new packages out ahead of maybe the original FreeBSD repo. And, let us experiment with things like that before you'll see it in the main line. But hopefully at some point, a lot of those things will get in the main line, and then we'll be pretty much up to date and in sync with one another.
Yep. I guess a couple of the other things, compile options and stuff, yours are slightly different. Yeah. But the other thing is the FreeBSD only does one per ABI. So they have one repo that covers 9.0, 9.1, 9.2. Whereas you would have separate ones for 9.1, 9.2, and 9 stable. Yes. The big difference there is the kernel modules, like things for VBox, VirtualBox. The PCBSD one does it better. Technically you'd
build on that version.
Right. Technically you'd only need to do that for a couple of specific ports, and you do the whole tree. But it just means that it's just works.
When I run file, I just like to see it matches.
Exactly.
My packages match basically what my world is. So that makes me feel good. And like you said, the options too. We build with a much more generous set of port options turned on, things that a desktop would want, like cups on everywhere, so you can print on web browsers.
If I'm setting this up on a server and I'm not printing, I don't want cups. And so, depending on, exactly. FreeBSD is targeted more towards a server, and most people's FreeBSD machines are headless, and so they don't want all the Xons.
They don't want extra on all that
by default. But for PCBSD, you almost always want all the X options on, and so on. Exactly.
Yep. So another question he has was about all the Wayland craze recently, and I've been reading that. There's a lot going on. I guess GNOME 3.10 and KDE 4.11 both have experimental support for the protocol. Will we be seeing any adoption happening in BSD soon? I'm not sure what the timetable is.
I don't know about a timetable, but there is experimental support for Wayland and Weston.
There is, and I think it all, of course, relies on having KMS and accelerated video and and this and that. So now that we're starting to get all the KMS bits in for ATI and Intel, I would imagine we'll start seeing more people play with this. I'm personally interested in it. I'd love to see X die and become just a library and not managing all this. I'd love to see a Wayland integration. I believe Wayland's MIT or BSD license too,
I'm not sure.
or something. So there's some selfish reasons there why I'd like to see us move to it. And then he asked a question about UDEV. He knows that we have our own awesome utility DevD, but there's still a lot of HAL left in the system. Is it actively pursued for depreciation, or is it going to stay with us for a while? What's with the hate for HAL anyway? HAL was a huge pain to get working, and it caused us a lot of fits with X and with programs and all kinds of stuff for a year or two in PCBSD. So it has been depreciated.
Deprecated.
Or deprecated.
Yes, depreciated means it's not worth as much anymore. Deprecated means you don't use it anymore.
Deprecated, don't use it. Well, it's still in the system, though.
Right.
It's in 10, there was a patch floating around to replace the HAL bits with DevD for XORG.
Yep, for device detection and stuff.
Yeah, for like mouse and keyboard detection and all that. I'll have to check. I'm not sure if that got committed to the ports tree yet or not. It may still just be out there in patch form. Hopefully that goes in soon, though.
Yep.
Once that starts hitting, then we're going to start seeing all the HAL bits get pulled out.
Yeah.
It's not that we hated it. It just made our life difficult in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and, with Linux kind of moving away from it, we have to be ready to do that as well. Otherwise, we'll get stuck
all
behind.
their upstream apps are as well. You know? But I guess part of the reason why I disliked it so much, it's like we had DevD and it worked.
Yes.
And when I plugged something in, it detected something. And then HAL was the one giving me fits. Like, why can't it find it now? So I'll just be glad to get all our stuff on the FreeBSD default DevD, which just seems to work. Yep. So I hope we answered your question there, Christian. Yep. And I guess last one goes to you,
Yes,
Alan.
The last question says, guys, love the show. He says a coworker got him into FreeBSD in the 4.x era, and he's loved the system approach and the simplicity of his configuration. And he found out about Dragonfly in 2004, 2005. And he's used CAME and stuff to do IPv6 for a long time. He found ZFS with Solaris 10 in 2005 and really loved it. And now it's in BSD, and he doesn't have to use Illumos or Solaris now. He can just go back to his lovely BSD and have ZFS and everything. And he says this show has rekindled the BSD spark for him, and he's installed 9.2 and began again to play with ZFS and he's also installing Dragonfly to try that as well. So cool. It's good to see that we revived the spark in somebody.
Definitely. Well, excellent. I guess that's the end of our questions this week. As usual, you can go ahead and send your own comments in to us at feedback@bsdnow.tv. We will try and monitor that, and if you send something cool in, we'll try and put it on the show in a future week. In addition, we're going to post all the tutorials, everything in their entirety up at bsdnow.tv. So after the episode, you can go back and look at the tutorial or any of the show notes. Any of the links we referenced will be in there, so you can click them and not have to go hunt them down yourself. And of course, you can be with us live Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern and catch a lot more of the banter that goes on between us in between the recorded segments. So that's 2 p.m. Eastern, 1900 UTC. So I guess that's the end of the show today, Alan. Anything else you want to add?
No, I just thanks again to our guest and everybody who watched.
Okay, thanks for being with us this week, folks, and we look forward to having you back next week.